The Byzantine court was in complete shock. The emperor was arranging an unusual ceremony with his young son. But what was truly stunning wasn't the ceremony itself, but the disturbing personal obsessions behind this unprecedented union. This story took place in 8th century Constantinople and was so scandalous that historians spent centuries trying to hide its details. The true story of Emperor Michael II reveals how absolute power can completely destroy moral boundaries and rational thinking. If you're fascinated by these buried historical secrets, don't forget to subscribe to Buried Truths and hit that like button. Comment below and let me know where you're watching from. It's incredible how we're uncovering these dark chapters of history together from different parts of the world, connected by our shared curiosity about the past. To understand this disturbing tale, we must first grasp the political chaos that gripped the Byzantine Empire during the 8th century. This was an era of unprecedented instability. Iconoclastic controversies tore the empire apart, religious divisions created bitter factions, and constant external threats weakened the imperial structure. Emperor Michael II ascended to the throne during this turbulent period as a young ruler barely in his 20s. From childhood, Michael had grown up, surrounded by the complex intrigues and power struggles of the Byzantine court. This environment profoundly shaped his personality, pushing him toward behaviors that defied conventional boundaries. Michael's father, Emperor Theophilus I, had left behind an unusual testament before his death. This document contained cryptic recommendations for ensuring dynastic continuity through unconventional methods. The language was so ambiguous and coded that young Michael found opportunities to interpret these instructions according to his own disturbing desires. The advisors surrounding Michael grew increasingly concerned about his interpretations of his father's legacy, yet none dared openly oppose him. In the Byzantine court, defying an emperor typically meant death, creating an atmosphere where dangerous ideas could flourish unchecked. Michael's first unconventional decision involved rejecting traditional marriage customs and establishing his own rules. He began dismissing court protocols and arranging ceremonial unions according to his personal whims. While these changes initially seemed harmless, they gradually took on a much darker dimension. Despite his youth, Michael's son became the centerpiece of the emperor's increasingly bizarre plans. Rather than treating the boy as a normal father would, Michael viewed him more as a personal project than as his heir, showing him affection that went far beyond appropriate paternal boundaries. The court's veteran protocol experts recognized that this situation was heading in a dangerous direction. However, Michael's growing paranoia led him to interpret any warning as evidence of conspiracy. This created a climate where everyone remained silent, even as they witnessed disturbing developments. Stephen, one of the emperor's advisors, expressed his concerns in private journals. His Majesty's behavior becomes more incomprehensible with each passing day. He recognizes no traditional boundaries and creates his own rule. Michael's mother, former Empress Theodora, was deeply troubled by her son's conduct. But as a widow with limited political influence, she found her attempts to reason with Michael futile. When she tried to speak with him, he dismissed her as a remnant of the old order and refused to listen to her counsel. As the emperor began implementing his unconventional plans, strange rumors started circulating through Constantinople. People living in neighborhoods near the palace grew curious about the unusual activities, but no one dared seek the truth. The Byzantine Church was also disturbed by these developments. The Patriarchate found the emperor's behavior religiously problematic, but lacked sufficient political power to intervene directly. This created a significant dilemma for religious authorities who witnessed moral violations but felt powerless to act. Emperor Michael's psychological state grew increasingly complex during this period. The traumatic experiences of his childhood, combined with absolute power, created a dangerous cocktail that seemed to destroy his ability to understand normal family relationships. Palace physicians wrote concerned reports about the emperor's mental condition, but these documents never became official records. Documenting the emperor's madness would have created an enormous scandal for the empire, so such observations remained hidden. Michael's son became a silent victim throughout this process. Despite his young age, he was crushed under the weight of his father's unconventional plans. The child's normal development was severely hindered by the dark atmosphere that pervaded the palace. John Grammaticus, the emperor's closest advisor, was one of the few who understood the gravity of the situation. But even he chose silent resistance over open opposition. While this approach provided short-term safety, it ultimately made the situation worse by allowing dangerous behaviors to continue unchallenged. The people of Constantinople grew increasingly uneasy about the rumors emerging from the palace. A population that had lost confidence in their emperor began to worry about the empire's future. This erosion of trust laid the groundwork for social instability. When Michael decided to proceed with his unprecedented plans, the palace erupted in frantic activity. Ceremonial preparations began, but no one dared openly discuss the true nature of what was being arranged. The court's protocol experts faced enormous dilemmas about how to organize such a ceremony. Traditional rules provided no guidance, as nothing like this had ever been attempted before. The emperor simply created his own procedures as he went along. During the preparation period, many veteran palace staff began resigning their positions. Numerous individuals chose to abandon their posts rather than participate in these events. This exodus of experienced personnel deepened the crisis within the palace. Empress Theodora made one final attempt to reason with her son, but Michael refused to listen and insisted on proceeding with his plans. This conversation became the last normal dialogue between mother and son. When the ceremony day arrived, tension in the palace reached its peak. Invited guests arrived in confusion, not understanding what type of event they were attending. The emperor maintained that everything was normal and proceeded with the arrangements. The unprecedented ceremony held in Hagia Sophia featured readings of texts written by the emperor himself rather than traditional religious prayers. These compositions contained language that blatantly disregarded normal religious protocols. The clergy present at the ceremony found themselves in an impossible position. Opposing the emperor could be fatal, but participating in a ceremony that violated religious principles deeply troubled their consciences. The people of Constantinople could hear strange sounds coming from the palace, but no one understood their meaning. Unrest began spreading through the city as residents held anxious conversations among themselves. During the ceremony, some of the palace's veteran protocol experts left the hall in tears. This scene provided the clearest indication of how abnormal the situation had become. Emperor Michael believed he had achieved a great victory at the ceremony's conclusion. In reality, he had seriously damaged both his own prestige and the empire's reputation. In the following days, an ominous silence settled over Constantinople. No one dared openly discuss what had transpired, but everyone shared the same question. How would this situation end? The Byzantine Church, after maintaining silence for a period, eventually declared these events religiously unacceptable. However, this condemnation came too late. The scandal had already erupted, damaged the empire's image. Even the Pope was shocked when news reached him from Constantinople. The Roman Church began reconsidering its relationship with the Byzantine Empire. This development increased tensions between the two churches. Michael's son completely withdrew during this process. The child lost any chance of living a normal life, becoming a victim of his father's obsessions. This trauma would affect the rest of his existence. Palace advisors began developing various plans to cover up the scandal, but the situation had grown so large that concealment was impossible. Damage control became the only remaining option. Emperor Michael's psychological condition deteriorated further after these events. Having completely lost touch with reality, the emperor began living in his own fantasy world. News of this scandal leaked beyond Byzantine borders. The Arab Caliphate and other neighboring states began using this situation in their propaganda. Byzantium's moral collapse became a great opportunity for its enemies. Rebellions erupted in the empire's eastern provinces. Local governors, seeing the weakening of central authority, launched independence movements. This resulted in territorial losses for the empire. The aristocracy in Constantinople began secretly planning to overthrow the emperor. These conspiracy attempts further increased the atmosphere of paranoia in the palace. When Emperor Michael finally recognized the opposition developing around him, it was too late. He had reached a point where he could no longer win anyone's trust. The prestige of the imperial institution had suffered serious damage due to his personal scandal. Eventually, even the palace guards began losing confidence in the emperor. This created conditions for a coup. It became clear that Michael's days were numbered. The end of Emperor Michael II came as a natural consequence of his own actions. When he was killed in a palace coup, few mourned him. Everyone had witnessed how damaging this scandal had been for the empire. This story serves as a horrifying example of how absolute power can destroy moral boundaries. When Emperor Michael acted without recognizing any limits, he destroyed both himself and those he claimed to love. His son could never live a normal life. After this traumatic experience, he spent the remainder of his existence under the shadow of his father's actions. This represents a painful example of power's destructive impact on innocence. After these events, Byzantine historians attempted to erase Emperor Michael's name from their records. However, the scandal was so enormous that complete concealment proved impossible. Modern historians study this incident as an important case for understanding the relationship between power and corruption. Michael's story demonstrates how uncontrolled authority can produce devastating consequences. Even today, we encounter situations where those in positions of power cross moral boundaries. Michael's story serves as a cautionary example regarding both the personal and societal consequences of such behavior. This dark tale reminds us that history isn't composed solely of triumphs and achievements. We cannot ignore the impact of powerful individuals' mistakes on innocent people. The story of Emperor Michael II painfully demonstrates the importance of using power correctly. This lesson remains relevant for today's leader. Contemporary parallels to Michael's story can be found in modern instances where authority figures abuse their positions to satisfy personal obsessions. The fundamental dynamics of power corruption remain unchanged across centuries. The most disturbing aspect of this historical account isn't just what happened, but how easily it could happen again. When institutions fail to provide checks on power, when advisors remain silent in the face of obviously wrong behavior, when religious and moral authorities prove too weak to intervene, these conditions create environments where similar tragedies can unfold. Michael's story also illustrates how power can isolate individuals from reality. Surrounded by people afraid to contradict him, the emperor lost all connection to normal human relationships and moral boundaries. This isolation became a prison of his own making, but one that ultimately destroyed innocent lives. The child at the center of this story represents countless victims of powerful individuals' unchecked desires throughout history. His suffering reminds us that behind every abuse of power lies real human cost, lives damaged, potential destroyed, and trust shattered. In our modern era of instant communication and global oversight, we might assume such blatant abuses are impossible. Yet, the fundamental psychology of power corruption remains unchanged. Technology may make scandals harder to hide, but it doesn't necessarily prevent them from occurring. The Byzantine Empire survived Michael's reign, but carried permanent scars from this episode. Trust in imperial authority never fully recovered, contributing to the empire's eventual decline. This demonstrates how individual moral failures can have far-reaching historical consequences. Religious institutions, in Michael's time, failed to provide effective opposition to his actions. This failure highlights the importance of independent moral authorities willing to speak truth to power, regardless of personal consequences. The silence of palace advisors, who witnessed these events unfold, teaches us about the complicity of those who enable abuse through inaction. Sometimes the most damaging participants in historical tragedies are those who could have intervened but chose safety over moral courage. This buried truth from Byzantine history serves as more than historical curiosity. It's a warning about power's potential for corruption and the devastating consequences when moral boundaries disappear. The emperor who thought himself above all law ultimately discovered that some violations carry inevitable consequences. In remembering this dark chapter, we honor not just historical accuracy, but also the victims of power's abuse across all eras. Their stories, however uncomfortable, must be told to prevent history's worst mistakes from repeating in new forms. The golden halls of Constantinople may have witnessed this tragedy over a millennium ago, but its lessons echo through time: power without accountability, authority without moral constraint, love without respect for boundaries. These combinations remain as dangerous today as they were in Michael's Byzantine court. We cannot change what happened to that child in 8th century Byzantium, but we can learn from his suffering. It's in a world where power continues to corrupt and the vulnerable still need protection. Such lessons remain painfully relevant. This is the buried truth of Emperor Michael II, that power's greatest danger lies not in its potential for external conquest, but in its capacity to destroy the moral foundations of those who wield it. When emperors forget they are human, humanity itself pays the price.